I'm pleased to be here tonight to kick off what I know will both be a very informative as well as productive discussion. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation of New York, who provided funding for the report that you received today. And Stimson Center is also grateful to the U.S. Department of State and the Finnish Department of Foreign Affairs for their support of Stimson's engagement with industry. One other administrative note, our discussions tonight will go until about 6:30, but you're all invited to stay for informal discussions and cocktails and what I'm told are an abundance of tasty hors d'oeuvres afterwards. So in March 1979, I was a sophomore in college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Lancaster, Pennsylvania is about 25 miles southeast as the crow flies, or as the wind moves, from a town known as Londonderry Township, Pennsylvania. And those of you in the industry know that that's the site of 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. So I can tell you that life was very different back then, before we had cable news and social media. And I first learned about the accident while walking across campus. I happened to comment on an odd smell in the air to a classmate walking in the other direction who said it was probably radiation leaking from 3 Mile Island. Of course it wasn't, but I was alarmed and quickly sought answers, and press coverage, frankly, was confusing. And I think that's because even the engineers were trying to understand what had happened and the extent of the damage, and local and state authorities didn't want to cause panic with the public or any kind of chaos. But in the end, my college evacuated campus for a week. And while we were eventually assured that the partial meltdown led to radioactive gas releases that were not threatening to the plant workers or to the local population, stories still lingered about increased cancer rates and about birth defects in livestock born in the area. And that was significant for that area because it's largely farming and agriculture. So in 1979, nuclear security to me, what I internalized was that it meant that the power plant had to be operated safely. And that certainly is the case still today. But we face other challenges today. We face the prospect of a possible cyber attack on a nuclear power plant. Or we face the threat from a terrorist group who would hope to create destruction and chaos with a dirty bomb. So this means nuclear security is an issue of the highest importance today. And former President Barack Obama initiated a series, as I'm sure you all well know, of 4 nuclear security summits in 2010. And it was quickly apparent that the leaders around the world recognized the need to collaborate on the issue. For example, at the 2016 summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping noted the importance of collaboration. He said, and I quote, "The International Atomic Energy Agency can play a central role to coordinate and consolidate global resources for nuclear security and use its professional expertise to serve all countries. As the most universal international organization, the United Nations can continue to play an important role. The awareness of the rule of law, the sense of urgency, and the spirit of self-discipline and coordination are central to the nuclear security culture. It is equally important that the academic community, the general public, also foster the awareness of nuclear security." I think President Xi's statements are critical, as China is the largest area of nuclear power growth. In addition, the United Arab Emirates is developing one of the first new power reactors as a nuclear newcomer state, and has been the exemplar of responsible development and cooperation. It's committed to the highest standards for safety, safeguards, and security, and it works closely with the IAEA and welcomes its peer reviews, and also exhibits a much-needed level of transparency in its approach. The UAE also supports regional nuclear development through its Gulf Nuclear Energy Infrastructure Institute. This collaborative approach is something that is needed for safe, secure nuclear development in all approaches, not just power. I am proud to be part of the Stimson Center because of events such as this one. Stimson is committed to working on international security and development by bringing multiple diverse stakeholders together to address issues that can better be resolved jointly. And I can't think of any other issue in today's world than nuclear security that requires this kind of collaboration. As we'll hear tonight, there is agreement about the need for collaboration, and there have been a number of initiatives that have been discussed and started. But the challenge going forward will be to continue that momentum, to take the great work, the framework that's been laid, and to keep it moving forward. And the authors of the paper that you have with you have some excellent ideas on how to accomplish this. And with that, let me introduce Stimson Center Senior Advisor Deborah Decker, who will preview some of the recommendations in the paper released earlier today and introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Leslie. We really appreciate your being here and all the service you provide to our board. I also want to recognize my other authors of the paper, Stimson non-resident fellow Catherine Rahut, for her work on this topic. She's worked on this from the start with me. Her legal insights have proven invaluable, both for this and for the other work we're doing going forward. I'd like to also thank Nuclear Security Program Manager Lovely Umayam, for her excellent perspectives in editing, and researcher Jackie Kempfer for becoming our new technology specialist and enthusiastically contributing to our work. She never says no. I would also like to thank our interns, Daniel Carr and Andy Matto, for their helps in producing this report, and Andy for helping to make tonight possible also. I thank you also for many of you in this room or online have peer-reviewed this paper for us, but any mistakes are our own, but thank you so much. So I attended the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit events and was struck by the level of collaboration that Leslie highlighted. However, now that the summit excitement has passed, a lot of this has waned. Let's be honest, there are other issues that we see so much in the fore, but this is one that we just can't afford to have wane. This is just too important. So that's one reason we put this paper together, to try to re-energize things, and let's get on the same page again. So we put forth 4 recommendations from our paper that I'm going to highlight. The summits help facilitate, finally, the amendment to the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials coming into force. And the convention requires that certain fundamental principles apply, such as ensuring quality management and giving due attention to security culture. And this even goes down to the licensing level. So countries have to ensure this, but they have to ensure their licensees do this. What does that mean? That means the operators. So this is all well and good, but the application of these principles at the operator level really needs to be ensured. So states need to agree. What we see needs to happen. States need to agree to hold regular reviews of the convention, and in those reviews, allow industry a voice in detailing some of the best practices and defining some of the vague terms in this wonderful treaty, such as applying physical protection measures insofar as reasonable and practicable. What does that mean? Well, industry can help. The IAEA gives some good guidance, but industry needs to translate this into what's possible and economically realistic. Second thing, this feeds into another one of our recommendations. And if we could, I need to show a picture of the report. We worked long and hard on this. Oh, I have the clicker, it's my fault. Okay, there. Okay, I obviously need click help. This feeds into another one of our recommendations, in this case for NGOs, encouraging them, or us. Okay, put my glasses on is what you're telling me. Oh, there you go. Okay. To promote industry transparency and accountability, and to help define new ways to increase security. One area that Stimson has been working on is developing market incentives, such as reduced liabilities and better insurance coverage, that would reward good operational security, so that security doesn't become just a compliance issue with a regulator, but becomes a demand. I mean, that operators should want to have this and have points, recognition for doing well. I'm happy to say, for example, that the World Institute for Nuclear Security, WINS, in Vienna, offers certified security training, and its academy now has over 1,000 people enrolled from over 80 countries for this training. This appears to be one area where operators have indeed found benefits from fostering good practices, and we need to find more of these. Third, another major recommendation is for the nuclear industry representatives involved in the summit process, possibly through industry groups such as this newly formed Nuclear Industry Steering Group for Security, which we affectionately call NISGIS, to explore specific ways they can help implement the Nuclear Security Summit action plans. 5 groups were tasked with going forward from the countries, the 50 or so countries that met in the summit. And Interpol, IAEA, the UN, a Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, and the Global Partnership. They can do a good job to some extent. They could do a great job if they were willing to collaborate with people on the ground like industry. So specifically, we suggest that an industry group like NISGIS could serve as the official hub for international information sharing and collaboration between these organizations and industry on security issues, develop an industry framework for strong governance on nuclear security, and start discussions on emerging nuclear technologies approaches that can increase or perhaps help to reduce risks. In some cases, industry needs to be invited into the international organization discussions, but if not, I think operators should just take the lead and do it themselves. Take the lead on this, because if you wait to be invited to the table, it sometimes doesn't happen. Set the table yourselves and invite them and do it the reverse way. Lastly, I have to mention one other recommendation. Help reduce reporting fatigue. All the reporting and overlapping reporting that states need to do from all the different Security Council resolutions, treaties. Can someone please, some enterprising states, please help some other states do this? Nearly 20 countries signed a joint statement on sustainability of information sharing and reporting and included a template for consolidated national nuclear security reports. Let's promote this and really get the UN 1540 Committee and IAEA on board. To summarize what we see as some of the summit promises and how collaboration can help, governments should call for regular reviews of the CPPNM amendment implementation and develop some automated reporting. NGOs should promote industry transparency and accountability and help to define new ways to increase security, such as market incentives. And finally, industry groups, such as the newly formed Nuclear Industry Steering Group for Security, should explore specific ways they can help implement the action plans for the key 5 international institutions. And those institutions, in turn, should recognize those benefits to engage industry who are actually managing the security operations on the ground. With that, I would like to introduce Maria Korsnick, the president and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, which I'm so happy to say is here. Her longer bio is with you, and NEI was responsible for the last summit, the first summit, and much of the work in between. So thank you so much for being here. And this is what you press.
Thank you for that. Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. And thank you very much for that kind introduction. Also, a special thank you to Dan Littman. He works for me, and he was very involved in arranging the Security Summit. So just wanted to make sure that he gets the due credit for all of the great work that went on with the Nuclear Summit. I'm going to start my discussion and just talk a little bit about the nuclear industry, and then at the end we'll come back to the relevance of security. But I wanted to start to sort of get us all on the same page with sort of what's going on with the nuclear industry, where do we stand now. So I'll start with what's the value of nuclear energy, and this slide shows how much we generate. So nuclear provides about 20% of the generation mix today. And what about its contribution to clean energy? So clean energy meaning no emissions. And it's about 60% of the contribution to clean energy in the United States. So a very, very significant chunk. And if I were to reflect on the Clean Power Plan, I appreciate that the Clean Power Plan never was implemented, but if it had been implemented, the amount that it was trying to reduce for carbon dioxide, the plants that are operating today, our 99 reactors, avoid 555 million tons of CO2, which is more than what the Clean Power Plan was trying to reduce in total. Okay, just to give you a value of the scale of what nuclear is bringing to the table relative to the environment. So let's talk about how that fleet is performing today. If I were to give you a statistic on operational performance, I would say the fleet is performing extremely well from an operational performance. So we look at a measure of the plant remaining online and producing power. We call that capacity factor. And the United States fleet for over 15 years 15 years running, has had greater than a 90% capacity factor. Okay, very, very significant. Okay, very positive. So it's operating very well. So what's the challenge? The challenge is that the marketplace today does not sufficiently recognize some of the attributes that nuclear brings to the marketplace. And as a result, this chart that you see up here is one rendition. If we're not recognizing the value of nuclear in the marketplace, and today we have a very high amount of natural gas because we have the pleasure of having a lot of natural gas resources, and they're now very achievable through technology like fracking, and so that has lowered the price significantly. We also have policies and practices that have been put in place that have favored other generations, say solar and wind. All of these pressures sort of together have created rather the perfect storm for nuclear. So you now have nuclear plants that aren't, in fact, making money in the marketplace as it's priced today. And so this chart shows today we produce about 100,000. You can see on the left-hand side, that's megawatts. So about 100,000 total for the fleet. And you can see in the not too distant future, we're not talking the 2030s, the 2040s, we're talking like the mid-2020s, that there can be a very significant decline. And that's showing you the stress that these plants are under in the marketplace. And if you're running these plants, so you're the boards of director for these plants, you'd say, well, you're not really making much money, so your license goes out till, say, 2030. But why would I operate you until 2030 if you're not making money today? So what this graph reflects isn't that licenses expire in this time frame. It's that boards of directors make decisions that says, well, at the end of the day, we're running a business and you're not turning a profit, and so I'm not waiting for your license to expire. We're just going to go ahead and shut you down early, premature closures. So we've had a handful of premature closures since 2013. We've had about 5 or 6 plants that have shut down prematurely. And if you look ahead in the next couple of years, there's been 8 plants that have already announced their intention to close prematurely if, in fact, the markets don't improve. So I just wanted to give you the snapshot in terms of what does that profile look like. So we took all of that information together and we stepped back as a Nuclear Energy Institute and we said, okay, what is it that we need to do to influence this in a more positive direction? And it's 4 things: preserve, sustain, innovate, and thrive. I'll spend a few minutes on each. So preserve is, in fact, focused on that revenue side of the equation that we just talked about. It's getting nuclear valued in the marketplace today. And there's been some recent information that's come out on that. You might have heard about it, where the Department of Energy did a grid study. They identified, in fact, hey, resilience is something that's important. Those nuclear plants offer resilience to the marketplace. One value of resilience is, well, geez, I don't know, how much fuel do you have on site? Things can happen. Fuel supplies can get interrupted. Do you have a sufficient amount of fuel on site? Their requirement was 90 days. What is the amount that nuclear plants have on site? Well, it's much more than 90 days. It's like 18 months to 24 months because that's what you put in a core for a refueling. And so in excess of what would be required for the 90-day requirement. And so the Department of Energy basically asked FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that said, hey, I want you to do a notice of proposed rulemaking that values these plants that have that ready fuel supply on site. And by the way, nuclear is an example of a plant that has that ready reserve. So will that happen? I don't know. I can just tell you that it's created a conversation that says, hey, we need to look at this. And so you'll see play out now. The comments of that rule were already due. We've submitted those. And so over the next couple of months, you're going to hear that process play out. In addition, that was at a federal level. In addition, you're seeing these conversations play out at the state level. Why? Because the states appreciate not only the reliability factor that these plants bring, but there's also the environmental kindness, if you will, that these plants are with no emissions, not only no carbon, but no nitrous oxides or no sulfur oxides either. And the fact that, quite frankly, these are very strong for the local communities in terms of the tax base that they provide, in terms of the value that they are to the community. I used to run a plant in New York, and we, in the plant that I was in charge of, looked ahead, and I said, you know, from a marketplace perspective, I can look ahead in, say, 5 to 6 years and see the possibility that maybe this plant would not be able to turn a profit, and so let's have that discussion. And I had that with the town mayor, with the school superintendent, with the locals, and you know, sort of the air goes out of the room. They're like, well, Maria, you are the school system. You know, the tax base that this plant puts out and has been putting out for over, you know, 40 years, we have designed the entire school system around that, you know, millions of dollars. So you're the police department, you know, you're the hospital, you're the school system, and these plants that are operating in the areas, mine was no exception, right? That is, in fact, how important that these plants are in that local community. So the idea around preserve is really looking at either state solutions or federal solutions that recognize this fuel assurance, quite frankly, that's brought, this resiliency, as we're calling it, as well as, in fact, the environmental benefits. Sustain is more on the cost and regulatory side. So sustain says, there's places and ways that there's a lot of heavy regulatory footprint on these plants. Could that be made more efficient? And you might have heard of an initiative that the industry started called Delivering the Nuclear Promise. We basically held a mirror up to ourselves and said, hey, we understand that some of the ways that we operate are more cumbersome than they need to be. Are there ways we can make our practices and our policies more efficient? And if so, let's do that. And let's get together as an industry and identify those. And so we have done that. We are doing that. Again, that's under the area of sustain. Innovate is the tomorrow. So innovate is, let's take that great American ingenuity and what are things we can do as we look ahead to develop new technology. In some cases, it's new technology that'll be used in the current plants, like advanced fuel types, for example. In some cases, it's entirely different entirely different reactor types. So think of advanced reactors and molten salt reactors, and they come in all shapes and sizes. There's real small ones, say 1 to 2 megawatts. There's medium-sized one, think some of your small modular reactors, and there's the large reactors that we have today. So all shapes and sizes in the sort of innovative space that's playing out today. And Thrive says, take all of that innovative ideas that you have here in the United States and sell them to the global marketplace. And there's some things that we do that make that a little difficult to participate in the global marketplace. So there's things that we have individual companies, and yet when they go out to compete, they're actually competing against countries. So our companies are competing against China, or our companies are competing against Russia, okay? And so that is a challenge, and there's things we can do to sort of level that playing field, and it's important. One of the things we want to do is broaden the voice. Who talks about nuclear? Okay, I'm talking about nuclear. Well, I'm a nuclear engineer. I run the Nuclear Energy Institute. There's not a big surprise that I'm talking about nuclear. But we wanted to step back and say, well, who else could talk about nuclear, right? Why is it that we need nuclear? What's the imperative, if you will, about nuclear? And so you can see on here we came up with 7 imperatives. And one that would be relevant to this crowd is U.S. global influence and national security. So the fact is that if we, the United States, wants to be relevant in understanding nuclear policy that's set around the world, based on our standards of operation, which are excellent, and if we want those standards to be used elsewhere, then we need to be in that conversation. A little hard to be in the conversation when you're shutting your plants down at home. You know, if you say, well, hey, I really want to build this reactor for you, it's just that I'm not building it in my current country, but I'd really like to build it in yours, and the other ones that I have, I'm closing them. So it doesn't really hang together, okay? So what we're really looking at is to say, hey, let's be honest with ourselves about the fact that it is very important for us to be in that global conversation, and we need to be relevant in that global conversation, then we need to stay in the game. And if we're going to stay in the game, we better look at that fleet that we have at home, because that fleet we have at home is our advertising campaign for why we want to be relevant in the world. And right now, it's challenged. That's my broad message. So in these national imperatives, what we're saying is, okay, it's not a surprise that I'm talking to you about nuclear, but hey, let's look at people that are interested in air quality. Let's look at people that are interested in climate change. Let's look about people that are interested in jobs and infrastructure. If they can be passionate about their cause, but also carry a nuclear message, then all of a sudden it's not just the nuclear energy people talking about nuclear energy. All of a sudden it's all these people talking about their passion for their cause with a flag for nuclear. That's the broader conversation that policymakers need to hear, that the folks on the Hill need to hear, quite frankly, that the general public needs to hear to have an appreciation of what nuclear brings. So let's shift gears a minute and say, all right, well, who's building reactors today? And this chart gives you a view in terms of who's building today. And it goes to the conversation that we just had. Our bar isn't so big. It has a number 2 down there that says under construction. And a 2 because what? Recently that was 4. And as you might have heard the announcement for the 2 plants that were being built in South Carolina at summer, they have stopped that build for those 2 AP1000s, and also that was connected a bit to the Westinghouse announcement of bankruptcy. And so we're in a challenging situation, not only from a market perspective, but we have in fact canceled 2 of the new builds that we had underway. Now we still have 2 happening in Georgia. They're also AP1000s, so a very good technology. I cannot impress enough how important it is that those new builds go forward, because they are in fact now the advertisement that we have that says this is a darn good design. We know it because we built it. We have one, and now we can enter a conversation with another country, which quite frankly is already underway, that says we think this is a good technology for you as well. But right now we have skin in the game because we're building this. So who is building? So 2/3 of all of the reactors that are under construction today, which is about 58 reactors, are being built with Chinese and Russian designs. Okay? Again, I want to impress how important it is that the United States stays relevant in this conversation. It was American ingenuity that brought commercial nuclear power into the world, and it's American ingenuity that has continued with the high operational excellence that we have today. And it's very important for the causes that we're talking about, not only from climate, but non-proliferation. If you do business with the United States, we care about the non-proliferation. We have rules about the non-proliferation, and that goes into the nuclear conversation. That's not the same if you don't build with us, okay? So again, we need to stay relevant in this marketplace to have the influence that all of us in this room know is so very important. Not only from a cybersecurity perspective, 10 years ago, we put cybersecurity rules in place for the nuclear plants here in the United States, okay? 10 years ago. So we've had 10 years of practice and 10 years of making those better. We have that way of doing business, that we want to be careful, we want to be certain, and we want to have the right rules in place. So it's very, very important for us to stay relevant, for us to not only be relevant, but thrive in the marketplace. And we're poised to do that with a lot of the very innovative and interesting designs that we have. But I'll tell you, we're at a very critical inflection point today for the United States and nuclear power, not only in this country, but how important that we're going to be in making rules in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll let you go, and then I'll sit down.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was really informative. Lots of stuff I didn't know. I'd like to welcome now a representative from Bruce Power, which Frank Saunders will tell us all about where Bruce Power stands in the world and what's going on in your country, too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to attempt in the next few minutes just to give you a picture of what security looks like on the ground at a nuclear plant these days. Make sure I can figure out which button is which here. There we go. So Bruce Power, a little bit about us. We are a private company, and that means a private for-profit company. We're not a government agency of any sort. Our 4 owners are across the bottom. Owners and TransCanada by far the larger stakeholders. Our 2 unions are also stakeholders in the company. This is our site up in Ontario along the east side of Lake Huron. 4 nuclear units here in the foreground, the Bruce B. 4 nuclear units up in the background, the Bruce A. So 8 nuclear units, 6,400 megawatts, 24/7 more or less. So this is 30% of the Ontario grid right here. The rest of the nuclear units in Canada are in Ontario add up to a little over 60% of the grid in Ontario, which is why the biggest reason why Ontario's grid is 97% carbon free. So most days, 100%, lots of days, but most days 97%. So this is a grid. You can see just up in here, this is a waste facility. This is actually run by OPG. This site is 12 square kilometers, or about 4.5 square miles for those of you that don't think in kilometers. So it's a big site, and our security looks after all of that site. We did, I should mention, we've refurbished 2 units at Bruce A already. We've just signed a deal with our owners for a $13 billion project to refurbish the other 6 units over the next 15 years, which will take this fleet out into 2060s. So what's happened on security at the Bruce site? Bruce Power started in 2001. That's why this picture says 2000. Picture on the left was what security looked like when I first arrived on site and had the honor of running security. It's where we put everybody we didn't know what else to do with. We put them in security. Right. So we had half-ton trucks for the patrol vehicles. This guy had a flashlight and a radio, and that was his total defensive capability. On the right-hand side, you see where we are today. Light armored vehicles are the patrol vehicles. The officers have a complete range of lethal and less than lethal force to use. This will give you a little picture of the training. So we've actually replaced those light armor vehicles now. The one on the top right is a new version, just came in last year. They love it. We use the use of force continuum that the police use in Ontario. So instead of using military engagement approach, we've used police engagement. You can see we've got kind of everything here. Every kind of weapon you can think of, including snipers and the like. I won't go into all the details because I'm not allowed to. This is the largest single tactical force in Canada outside the military at the Bruce site, run by a private company. This is really unusual in Canada. If you know us in Canada, this just doesn't happen. So this is unusual. Lots of fixed equipment, of course, fences, various things. The one with the circle is the outfall, so the boats and divers and others can't get in there. Aside from that, lots of cameras, thermals, low light, motion detect. If you're anywhere near us, we'll see you, and we see way beyond the fence. I warn the boaters out on the lake to be careful what they do because we can see out there a long way, and we can see in great detail. So tactical equipment, these are the light armored vehicles. We do use the tactical mobile response, and so this is part of the training. These folks, there's 3 months of training before they start. They got to pass. And then there's 6 weeks of refresher training every year, including physical fitness testing that they have to go through. And this here just indicates the low light cameras on the vehicles. And of course, they exist a lot of places other than the vehicles. Your normal entry exit controls looks like an airport's got a few more things than an airport has. But we put a couple thousand people through there every day. So there's several lanes, of course, to just show you one. We've always, from the very beginning, believed that we really needed to be out in the open with this and up front with people, especially in ours, because, like I say, it's not a normal thing in Canada to have this kind of security force operating. So we've been very public about it. In the middle there, you see one of the world SWAT competitions, or I guess this was the U.S. National SWAT competition that we won. We won several of those, and we went out and did those competitions on purpose so that people could see it. These are some of the international magazine covers we got, and we thought it was great because they go pick on somebody else rather than us, the bad guys. So that was why we did it that way. And not to forget emergency response. One of the big conflicts with security is your ability to be able to respond quickly in emergencies and deal with them. Security can very much get in the way of that. So we made this all one organization. This is the structure. We operate a managed system in Canada that's based on, as required by our license, it's based on CSA N286 standard, which is a managed system standard. It's a very rigorous standard. It's an integrated management system. So we have a great deal of governance around how security operates as well as everything else. There are a lot of things important on the site besides security, but we treat security with the same level of importance. This is one part of the governance, which is oversight. This shows you the consecutive rings of oversight that exist there. From our own internal stuff, I just pointed out a couple of things for you. We have an Emergency Management Oversight Committee which looks at all of this. It's chaired by our Chief Nuclear Officer, involves executives and senior managers across the site. That's to make sure that we stay integrated on management and emergency response. You'll note the Nuclear Safety Review Board. It's chaired by a member of the board. It looks at, visits us 4 times a year, spends a few days looking at all the details around nuclear safety, including emergency response and emergency preparedness, and reports back to the board at the board meetings. And of course, we have CNSC, our regulator, like your NRC, who frequently come and test us and try us out to see if they can sneak by us or not. And of course, I shouldn't mention the IEA and the IPAS mission. We had one of those last year. The IPAS missions are rather neat because they look at the whole country and how you deploy your security forces, not just at the plants, but the plants are part of that. It was quite a rigorous review. And not to leave cybersecurity out, we also have a pretty advanced cybersecurity program. This is the Canadian Standards Association standard on cybersecurity, which we and the regulators, and several others actually, CSA has a way of developing standards in public domain, and this is our guidance on how to do cybersecurity. We only issued it last year and we're already updating it. So much for IT is a rather hard thing to keep up with. Awareness is important, as is culture and other things, so we do, this is an upcoming event next week. We have a member of the Center for National Security in Canada coming to talk to our folks, not the security folks, but to our employees in general, security folks as well, about security, and this is just to keep the awareness there about both cyber and physical security and the kind of things we need to look for. You've got to keep reminding people because it never happens, right? It's like nuclear safety, the events never happen. So how do you stay vigilant? How do you stay aware? And this is one of the tools. And talking about that culture really makes a difference. What people believe in their core, what they think in their core, makes a difference when it comes to things like safety and security. And when people have to operate on their own, you're not always with other people. So you need to have a sense of whether they really believe the things that you want them to believe. And this is what cultural assessments do. They don't really measure competence. They don't measure your ability to do things. They measure what people think. It's our perception of what the world is. We've been doing these, of course, ever since we were in SEPTA because we're required to as a safety culture thing. The issue we had was there are too many surveys. So how do we do this, right? Everybody wants a survey. We got surveys on people's involvement and surveys on various things. So how do you keep checking people without getting them so tired of surveys that they just start telling you what you want to hear, which is a big danger. So we've decided here in 2016 to bring in the security culture assessment. We made it part of our overall safety culture assessment. We added in about 20 or 30 questions, I guess, so we made the thing a little bigger, but we do them at the same time. Worked out really well. We used the IEA background material to do that in combination with our own stuff and phased them together. And for the safety culture, we use a combination of the INPO and the Canadian safety culture work, and we think we've kind of hit a good spot, and we'll keep developing it further. Did I miss anything here? Oh, and we also added a lot of focus groups with people on security as well. So aside from the actual survey, we do focus groups too. So we ask some people things like, do you believe the insider threat is a real threat? Do you think your neighbors could be a threat to you and to the plant and so forth? Do you believe that at your core? And I bet you can guess what the answer is. Right? We're a rural area. Small. And the answer is mostly people don't, actually. No, not until it happens to you. But so that's part of, you find out in these things, and then you spend time convincing people that yes, it really does happen, and you need to be aware of it, and you need to report unusual things. We took a look at the governance template, one that the Stimson Center and IEA have been working on. We sort of checked it off against what we do, and we thought we had a pretty good match, all told. I think it's actually a pretty good template. We just threw a few examples in there of the things we do. I don't know whether we really put them all in the right box, but by and large, I would say that all of these things actually are really important. And in our view, they fit very well with our integrated management models. The way the model is set up, we call it Plan, Do, Check, Act, much like ISO does, right? So what are you trying to do? How are you doing it? How you know you're doing it? And where's your oversight at the end of the day? So looking at the future, what's a challenge for us? You know, terrorism doesn't seem to be going away. It seems to be getting bigger and it's getting more sophisticated. So we are in fact a very regulated industry from cradle to grave. So it's very easy every time there's an act or a terrorism for a regulator to say, do a little more, right? However, how do we keep competing with all those other people that don't have this regulation? Right? And it's not because they're not any less dangerous than us. There are all kinds of industries that are in fact quite dangerous in an accident scenario, but none of them get the scrutiny that we get. So how do we level that playing field and at the very least make us all compete at the same level? You know, I think it's an interesting question. It's not an easy one, but that's a challenge. This, like I say, this program, when you consider that as a private company, we've got, you know, that largest tactical force in the country outside the military. They're a little bigger than us, but that's okay. That's a big thing, and in truth, that costs us about $40 million a year to operate. So this is not an inexpensive operation, and that's only the operating costs. That's not the capital that you need to refurbish all that equipment. All that equipment doesn't last forever all by itself. You're continuously, just like we buy new armored cars, we have to buy new fences, new cameras, new that. And on a site our side, that's just a continuous thing. Technology advancement. I see Aries is in the room today. We're doing a lot of work on technology advancement, try to offset those costs. In nuclear, we love simulations and we love analysis, so we've worked on an analysis program. Have the whole site mapped in detail, and we can do the analysis for different attack paths and so forth and provide more efficient security. It's also happening here in the US at many of the plants. This is a good opportunity for us to be more efficient and save some cost, but the trick in this is always the regulator. Regulators are not really fast with new technology, and they're not really, they have this thing they call margin. So if you need 2, they'd like you to have 4. And if you're the least bit uncertain about it, they'd rather you had 6. So it gets expensive. And so how do we get better at doing this? And operating experience, I think probably in my view, one of the biggies. We actually have some pretty good work in Canada through our Canadian Security and Intelligence Services. We get briefings twice a year as an industry about what's going on. We also have a Center for National Security, which is mostly infrastructure companies and government agencies where we get some good briefings. However, and we share a lot between our own utilities in Canada. But in most things in the nuclear industry, in the OPEX side, if an accident happens halfway around the world at a nuclear plant, I will know about it almost instantly, and by a day or 2, I'll have all the details so I can look at it myself. And WANO or INPO in the case of the US will show up sometime in the next year and ask me what I did about all that. We get that information. We don't get that in security. And there's a reason for it. It's a challenge. It is a challenge, and we do need to find a way of doing that. Obviously, it has to have a little more thought about how we protect the information, but somehow we've got to understand the root causes of the issue so we can learn from them. We do not have a good system for doing that, and I think we could do a lot better if we put our mind to it. One more thing I wanted to mention, next year, as it happens in July, we're sponsoring a conference up in Ottawa. It's a 4ATOM conference and supported by the IEA. It's about quality leadership and management and culture. We are going to have a security track in that conference that people might be interested in getting involved in. We're thinking along these lines here. So the abstracts are out. If you're interested, you want to get some thoughts on the ground about security and security management and culture, this will be the opportunity. We'll of course be talking about operations as we always do, and regulators. We will have a contractor or supplier track as well. So we'll try and work in all those things. This is a big area of change that's going on in the industry at the moment, moving towards this integrated management approach. It's a very sensible approach, but it's a lot of work to go from where you are to what that integrated management system works like. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much for that. And I really love the fact that we actually see what's going on and you get a real feel for it. And the a couple of reasons we wanted to have Bruce Power. It's the largest plant in the world, I believe, operating plant.
Currently is the largest nuclear facility.
And has done this integrated approach, not taking the stratified safety, security, approach that the IAEA does, but it's integrated them. We have another Canadian coming forward. So thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. Dr. Barrett is former, still very much involved with the IAEA in many ways, but has been a former chair of the IAEA Board of Governors and is now Canadian Nuclear Association President and CEO. So we thank you for coming and giving us some additional perspectives.
Right, thank you very much. I think everything's on and you can hear me. Good. First of all, thanks to the Stimson Center for the invitation. Thanks, Aunt Leslie, for the great work that you're doing. So we appreciate that. And Deborah and Lovely and the rest of the team, the work you're doing on the nuclear security side of things and the governance, et cetera, and the paper today is really excellent, and I commend you for it. Before I start, some people have asked about this, and maybe you think for a moment that it's a secret badge of the nuclear folks in Canada that they wear these things. This is a stylized poppy, and for many of us, it signifies that on November 11th is our Remembrance Day, so Memorial Day, and that it matches the last day of the war, the First World War, at 11 o'clock in the morning of the 11th month. And so that's our commemorative day, and so much of the fighting took place in Belgium and Flanders, and there were poems written about in Flanders fields where the poppies grow. So when you wear that, it's commemorative, you raise money for the vets, and that's why we wear it. Okay, onward. Now, where am I? Yes, I'm clicking. There I am. There, done. So I'm following a structure here that was laid down by Deborah. So the narrative is a shared narrative, the structure of the narrative, but it's to give some overviews, and hopefully in discussion we'll get into some more detail. Frank gave you the idea of what's happening in Canada on the side of the Bruce plant. Just a couple of facts and figures. The nuclear side of things produces about 16% of our electricity across Canada, but 20% of the clean. So Maria mentioned the amount of clean energy or clean electricity that's produced by nuclear in the United States. Our percentage is lower because we have so much hydro. And when you put together Quebec, provinces of Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia, you get a huge amount of hydro. So that's why our percentage is about 20 on the clean. Just a couple of things that we're doing at the CNA, but it sort of reflects where we are in Canada. We've been invited to offer a Vision 2050, Canada's Nuclear Advantage, as part of a federal discussion that was initiated by the NRCan, Natural Resources Canada Minister, our energy minister, on generation energy. And he was calling upon all the energy systems in Canada, from fossil fuels right through and including renewables, to offer their views of where they thought Canada should go and their industry would be in the years ahead. So you can access that at our site. I won't go into detail, but it does, as the vision idea suggests, as we tried to look at the nuclear industry being not a product of the 1970s or 80s, but a product of very much the 2010s and the 2020s, part of the advanced technology, part of the innovative work, and definitely part of the climate change solutions and the clean energy contribution. So we're moving into that space. We also wrap ourselves closely into the UN Sustainable Development goals. We produce a little brochure here, but the idea is to show that nuclear science and technology contributes to 9 of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So next week I'll be at COP23 rather, and trying our best to actually impress that contribution into the consciousness of a lot of the people there who I think have a tendency to not realize that or not want to realize that. But it is a sustainable development, and I think the more we talk about that as an industry, I think that would be a good way of getting access to certain audiences that don't naturally think of nuclear science and technology. The federal government responded to the parliamentary committee's report on Canada's nuclear energy. Sounds a bit bureaucratic, but that was the first of the Liberal government that was elected 2 years ago. That is the first statement that was made on civil nuclear power in Canada. It wasn't a full statement, it wasn't a full policy presentation, but it does show that they have interest in advanced technologies. They're certainly interested in the applications beyond power in isotope work and medical. They recognize that, but they also starting to recognize more the contribution to the climate change challenge. It sounds a bit odd to most of us here, but you do have in our current government, federal government, I think a number of people who, if you ask them, would prefer a 100% renewable future. So we're working with that kind of audience. Long-term energy plan is important because that is where practical work is being done. So you've got aspiration, but here you've got the refurbishment of those 10 reactors. 10 reactors, the reactors at Bruce that Frank mentioned will be refurbished, 6 of them, and 10 at Darlington to make the, 4 at Darlington to make the 10. But this is, and I have no hesitation to say, the biggest investment in clean energy, and clean energy in definitely North America, because it gets up to over $25 billion over the next 14, 15 years as these will take us up to 2050, these reactors. So this is exclusively in Ontario, as the name suggests, but it is a huge investment. It's a very important one. And I won't go into all these details here on the small modular reactors, but there is interest, there's no doubt. We've done some work on possibility of small reactors in Canada's north. There's a technology forum looking at the regulatory issues around such types of technology reactors. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories at Chalk River, you can visit these sites and get the, well, I don't think you can get that one, but you can certainly get this one here from the CNSC about how to regulate, some presentations, perspectives. This is a call for expression of interest from vendors on SMRs for Chalk River, and they got something like 18 companies that came forward, and they sort of document that. Right, let's move on. Because we want to talk about the Nuclear Industry Summit, and here you can see that there was a working group 3. That was the one that I was involved in. There were 3 working groups that was created by the International Board of Advisors that we mentioned earlier, that Dan Lippman and NEI was so much involved, especially in the Washington Summit and in the Industry Parallel Summit at the time. Now in doing the benefits to humanity, which is kind of like this, did you know that nuclear science contributes to so many parts of our life? It was that kind of, I was charged with that mission to open the eyes of the readers and the audience a bit more. But along the way, this is a security summit, so you start thinking about, let's add this following bit to the presentation. Let's talk about how international treaties, this is a public audience, so international treaties, regulations, we have those. Frank mentioned a few of them, how we're a very regulated industry, so we have that. And companies have the responsibility to secure these materials. And there is a bit of a gap, I think, between the laws and international treaties and how well that they are implemented across the world. So the challenge is, I note there, is how to demonstrate, how can industry demonstrate that it is in compliance? Because it has that operational responsibility and accountability. If those handling the materials, you see, show that accountability, then there'll be more confidence. So it's a kind of a confidence-building perspective that I was trying to add into the working group as we went through these benefits. Okay, they're the benefits, but we also want to assure the public that not only do we produce these benefits, but we also look after the safety, and in this case, for this project, the security, and how do we do it? My own interest in the corporate governance led me to be interested in the sort of internal within a company, in a corporation, how is security being dealt with? And the accountability via corporate governance is very important for this compliance. So when you look at it from a CBM perspective, I think you see that if companies or corporations that are operating plants are able to show how they have accountabilities, much like what Frank put up on the board earlier when he was showing the Bruce example, then you start to show to a public and you can do it through public company reports too, is that you have that well in hand and you're offering those assurances out there. And I see a show there that we worked with Roger Housley and with Frank on the generic template, which then did appear, and I have it here somewhere, but it was just on the report. I put it in an appendix, and this is still accessible somewhere, I think, on the NIS site. But the most important thing is that people like Deborah and Catherine and Lovely and others started to take this over and really start to make it sing a bit more and get into it in detail. And that was great news for me, because I kind of got to as far as I could go. And so when we got to the end of the summit, the Board of Advisors gathered on the next morning, so to speak, and said, well, now what do we do? NSS is going to the contact group on nuclear security, but what does industry do, and how can we support? So again, the premise is, and I think it's pretty straightforward, if operators, transporters, and users are at the sharp end of protecting nuclear materials, isn't essential to include them at some point in the intergovernmental or NGO deliberations on nuclear security, just to be there. And if these deliberations are resulting in guidelines and rules and that can be legally enforced, shouldn't there be a means to register industry's interests and concerns? And how can we do this? You have WANO and INPO that were mentioned earlier as looking in particular at operational performance and safety, but what's the equivalent? WINS can do a lot of it, the World Institute of Nuclear Security, but not all. So in December 2016, we launched the, I've never pronounced it before, so I was very glad to hear it, because you gotta be careful, it sounds a bit like a sneeze, doesn't it? But it's NIS, I'm sticking to NISGS, okay? Because you think I have a cold. And so it's the Nuclear Industry Steering Group for Security. We got our terms of reference, modus operandi, and frequently asked questions. We launched that, a nucleus of that group at the end of the summit in March of 2016. And so moving on to December, we launched it at the IAEA conference there. Because as you know, out of the Nuclear Security Summit came the directive, the guidance that security was now going to move into 5 action plan organizations, and there they are with IAEA designated as sort of primus inter pares. And to me and others, the colleagues, we thought, well, it makes sense to show that industry is ready to assist. We can bring expertise engagement. We don't know how much the industry can support, Interpol, for example, but how do you find out without just sitting and talking with them? So we need engagement. And I come back to this point because without engagement, we don't know where we can play a role, how to do it, and work out that kind of sort of basic relationship. So far, no organization of those 5, and correct me, Dan, if I'm wrong on any of this, no organization has reached out to us. We approached the IAEA and it rejected our engagement because we are not an established NGO, not-for-profit. We are not institutionalized. And the letter we got back was very bureaucratic along those lines. One suspects there were other reasons, but we can go offline on what that might be. But in any case, we didn't get any kind of joy in trying to say to the IAEA, while you're working in your nuclear security committees and on your documents, maybe industry could also be there and offer some views. I mean, it's fairly light views and et cetera, but we didn't get that far. So only the contact group, and this was a great bit of support. It's an unfinished business at the moment because we're just sort of feeling each other out and trying to see how we can engage with the contact group. I'm hoping, this is the continuation of the Nuclear Security Summit. It's gone into a contact group. It basically were the countries at the Nuclear Security Summit, but the door is open for others to join. And in that, we are hoping that those members of the contact group will be able to stimulate, because many of them are members of the, well, they're all members of the UN, but in other groupings, to be able to help us get to the table. And we haven't sort of broke through. We've got many who are trying to help us. I see Laura Holgate there. She's been a great supporter of the work of NISGS and that whole concept. But as I say, the work is unfinished. And that's why this report is very important, because we need kind of more leverage and more pushing on these doors to get in. At the moment, we're looking at 3 working groups in NISGS, one on cybersecurity. We had that before in 2016, but cybersecurity, as Frank says, doesn't really go away on you, and it's a complete subject of a lot of interest in industry, government, etc. Training and accreditation of personnel, WINS does a lot of work there, and there's great appetite for that. And then there's the third area, it's on governance. And this is where, again, the Stimson report starts to play a role, because it's working in there as a sort of basic document. I think it will be a basic document of that side of things. So just got a couple more slides. So there, being fairly honest about it all, we're a bit hamstrung by our NSS pedigree, because there are some countries that have not really supported engagement because maybe they associate our group with where it came from, and that was out of the Nuclear Security Summit, which is a more limited number of countries that were in that. We're not incorporated, as I mentioned, it limits our access. So I mentioned that, having to rely on the contact group. We don't have a small secretariat to coordinate and drive events and events and outreach, so that limits our potential. It's because that nucleus that I mentioned in setting up NISGS is really about half a dozen people in particular. Like any organization or anything you've been involved in, you always know there's a lot of names on the cover, but the people who are actually trying to push things along, bring out ideas and get things done is smaller, and we do have day jobs, so we're lacking that. WINS is supportive within its means and mandate, but we have to find our solution. Here are some ideas, either through separate funding or partnership. Do we consider NGO status? It's a bit more work. So we need institutional grounding, and there's to embed the routine and continuity, organize events, and instill common purpose. So looking forward, as I mentioned, this report is very timely, can help light the way ahead. It identifies areas of action and suggests areas where industry could have a role. That's if you're just looking at it for the first time, you'll see a lot of good material and a great bit of work of organizing it, because it didn't originally appear like that. So you've done a fine contribution in the appendices B and C. Suggests, as Deborah said at the outset, one recommendation is an information hub. Well, we should probably try to start by considering how to utilize the industry OPEX that Frank was mentioning, much like WANO and safety, for strengthening power plants, transport, and radiological source. We could become a focal point to bring OPEX to that experience to those action plan organizations that I mentioned that we're still kind of knocking on the door. It suggests that we be a focal point for security governance within industry, so we could develop the governance template for different national conditions while maintaining and improving standards of accountability. So I know that you've already done some work at looking at if this is the case for private companies or companies that have a kind of Western corporation structure, is it the same for state-owned enterprises or state-run? And I know there's been some thinking and work on that to see how much it matches. We should flag emerging technologies. I mentioned at the outset SMRs, but we might as well start looking at the security implications of different types and different technologies that are in the SMR, under the SMR banner, because we have some new technologies that are being thought about, so that it's well understood in the design, development, deployment. I mean, we encounter, and I'm sure Maria gets the same, vendors and technology designers who come by with their ideas for, in this case, small reactors. And sometimes as you're going through the presentation, that you say, have you considered some basic things like, is there a demand for this? I mean, do you have a host community? Or in this case, you could say, have you thought through the security dimensions? This will be remotely operated or operated, some of the designs, they want to operate them remotely. Yeah, okay, well, the cyber issues, have you thought through those? So we can start leading the way there. And there's a summary. So, need to gain access. I think I mentioned the outset, the political focus, and some of us were at another conference where I think, again, what came from it is that quite often, when you talk about nuclear power generally, in other countries and cultures as well as our own, I have to quite often be talking about the peaceful uses and the benefit of humanity for the technology, and then move to a discussion of security as an enabler. Don't start with that, unless you're in a forum like this, in which case people understand it, and you can start with security. And ISGS could be the forum and support body to gather that OPEX, as I mentioned. Conferences, workshops, but there's that budget and staff support, unless we clone Dan and a few others, and we can maybe do it. The review conference coming up in 2021, I think I got that right. We could maybe start angling for an advising or supporting role for the parties in reviewing and improving compliance. We try to give some input to the review progress. Maybe that's the working group on governance could undertake that. SMRs, I mentioned that. And the final word, for now, is that we're not an NGO, so therefore limited as a central hub for the recommendation that was made at the moment. We'd have to have a good discussion on how do you logistically do it. But it's not impossible, it's just that right now we would need funding support or a partnership. So that's about it. Open to ideas. So in the discussion, if you've got any thoughts or you see there, please send me an email, because right now we're looking to see how we can energize what I think we all hopefully will agree is an important contribution, role of industry, but we need to sort of break through on a few fronts. And with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Well, we've heard a lot, and I want to, before I volunteer Stimson to be the NGO that absorbs this.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Have to check with the board on that, but wins would seem the logical one. I want to take us back to the first thing we started with, because this is all in the context of nuclear and its future and potential growth, not only in power, but in other areas. Like we see research reactors, agriculture. I mean, there's so many areas where it's growing. Could you tell us a little bit, maybe Maria, about what do you see as this, also on the SMR front, as you pointed out, as was last pointed out, that we don't, even SMRs, we're not, that I think is part of the future, and are we looking at security in that context? Or, I mean, so what do you see in terms of the U.S. challenges and the build, own, operate model that Russia, I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, take your choice, because I have so many of them, that Russia and China is doing that we can't compete with because we're, state-owned enterprises?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Let me just kind of start by saying that I'm very optimistic that the United States, through, again, the entrepreneurial spirit, will bring things to the marketplace that will thrive. They're not only going to thrive here in the United States, but elsewhere. We've mentioned small modular reactors, and small modular reactors, by their nature, small and modular, have the opportunity to be built in much more of a manufacturing environment. If you look at some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier about plants being challenged in terms of being built, a lot of that is the construction risk. And so when you're building something in a manufacturing environment, you're really starting to manage some of that construction risk in a way. So anyway, I'm very optimistic as we look forward. And I would just say security needs to be a part of a conversation no matter what we're building. It really is irrelevant in terms of whether it's 1 megawatt or if it's 1,500 megawatts. And they all have, different, as I said, different shapes and sizes. Some versions almost think of it as a nuclear battery, if you will, almost. Some are going to be built, maybe not even to produce electricity. They're going to be built because you want the sort of high-energy steam, and that high-energy steam is going to be used in, in other manufacturing ways, or think of, sort of desalinization, these kinds of things. So just think of nuclear as, I'd say, broader than as we envision it today. Today, we think of it as really just connected to the electric sector, and I would say as you look forward, it has a broader footprint. But it doesn't matter why you're using it, it doesn't matter where you're using it. For things like security, quite frankly, it has to be built in up front. And I'm confident through the process that we have and sort of the regulations that we have that they'll absolutely be considered.
And on the build, don't operate, we were both at a meeting last night where it was talked about how the U.S. could possibly make joint ventures, or what type of support has the Trump administration done in leadership? Who do we need to lead on this to get the U.S. to be competitive again?
Boy, I would tell you the Trump administration has been incredibly supportive of nuclear, not only directly from the administration, but the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Perry, again, incredibly supportive. And you know, as a result of that, and as a result of sort of encouraging those discussions, you might have heard that Saudi Arabia, for example, is interested in nuclear, and the United States is involved in that conversation, you know, among other countries. So I think it's already, if you will, shown that we have an opportunity to compete. Now, to your point, you know, there's people that might be bringing the build, operate, and take your used fuel. That's not necessarily what we're bringing to the market, but we're bringing other things. I think we're bringing, as I said, the sort of the history of the strong operations that we have. And I think generally in our models, you know, we're looking for the benefits of operating this facility to cause that area to thrive. So we want to look at it in a way that we're creating, you know, a thriving industry wherever it is that we're building.
Thank you. I want to just quickly touch on the nuclear. I'm sorry, John. I call it NISGIS.
Sorry.
Is Rosatom a member of that?
No, the Rosatom isn't. We've approached them, and in our design of the NISGS, we've made provision for sort of an observer status to try to accommodate those who aren't quite ready to step fully in but want to be associated, you know, to be as flexible as possible. But we haven't quite been able to do that. I think it may be, well, it's hostage to some other, you know, political things that maybe this is just a manifestation of it. Last time I was asking about it, they said, well, if we were more associated with the IAEA's nuclear support, security support centers that are, I don't know, I forget how many there are, but there's a few out there, maybe 20, that might be an avenue. So, I mean, at this point, I'm happy to look at everything. I mean, keep you know, the mind open to see whether, if we went that route or explored it, would we start to lose some of whatever is the critical or the raison d'etre that we've already established for it, you know? But yeah.
You know, because at the operational level, I know that the U.S. and Russians are joint chairs of the Global Initiative to Counter Nuclear Terrorism, and they have exercises going on. I mean, when you drop down from the politics and what people are talking about up here, hopefully the operators can communicate, and I would hope that at that level that could possibly happen. So, so the other thing is, you were talking about the governance group. Jackie, do you have a copy of the, so just so your reference, which is, this is not really fully in our report, but the, you all developed this governance template, Bruce Power and, you know, working together, I guess, and WINS and a number of people. And what we've done is we've helped develop it further, working with responsible care and chemical industry. Security is not unique to nuclear, so let's put other things in there and try to leverage it. Originally, we were looking at management systems, and hey, how do you do management systems, and could you be certified? And then the more we talked to people, we said it's culture. Culture is so important. And the reason I invited Bruce Power in particular here is they were very unique in getting across the different silos of IAEA. And you said, we're going to do a combined safety and security culture assessment. Those two groups hadn't been talking to each other in the IAEA. They are recently now having, let's have common definitions. But here's an example of where an operator decides, we need to do it this way. So, I mean, could you tell us, you know, how that has worked? I mean, how did you manage to transcend all the different culture and all the imperatives that you know, was put on you potentially by the guidance documents?
Well, I mean, to be honest, the challenge we face as operators all the day, there seems to be always another regulator who's going to tell us how to do something. And frequently they don't bother asking how we would do it. They just sort of pass it over. So we've learned over the years to get engaged early and have those discussions. So in this case, we were well engaged on management systems with the IAEA. and security and the security culture, the safety culture aspects. And we realized we needed to broaden it out to do other things. And so rather than just sort of waiting for someone to make it a mandate, we thought, well, why don't we try and find an efficient way of doing this and try and bring other people along. I would still say it's a work in progress. Not everybody agrees this is the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
But I believe it's moved the ball a long way down the court, and it's reasonably efficient. And you don't tire your employees out by giving them too many surveys. I mean, it's the biggest complaint we hear anytime you do surveys. Right? You kind of have to twist their arms to get them to go do the survey.
Right.
Right?
No, I understand that.
And I'm the same way. Every time a survey comes into my machine, I hit the delete button. So, unless it's one I really have to do, and then I do it. But by and large, you get 2 or 3 surveys every day, so you get very good at just hitting the delete button. Right? So you need to work at this if you want people to be engaged. And so first off, you need to make it relevant to what you're doing, which is not necessarily the same everywhere. Right. And secondly, it needs to be sort of efficient in the process.
So I'm going to open it up to questions just briefly. I want to say, John, would you like to have an advisory group that to support this NISGIS on your security governance panel? I know that we could certainly use more input on this ourselves. Do you think that might work?
On that particular working group?
Yeah, on that working group.
Oh, all advice is gratefully welcome and received.
Good.
No, because when you think of the group itself is kind of like an advisory body, if you will, NISGS. But within the working groups, and I wouldn't speak for the other ones, because they are a bit different, cybersecurity.
Right.
You know, people here know that.
Different ones
yeah,
take
and
different
so,
things.
but in the governance, yes.
Well, and it
indeed.
seems like Bruce Power is one who's in the lead on this. Can I ask you whether Bruce Power would be willing to serve on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I don't think there'd be any doubt. I mean, in fact, you'd have a hard time doing without us, but
Thank you.
Keep the door in. So.
And NEI, can I ask you if you? I know Dan's already hit the limit, so maybe one of the members.
Looking for a head nod back there.
Whatever you say.
Well, or you could put it down to Exelon or someone else.
We're happy to contribute. We'll organize it in terms of who would be the representative.
This is fabulous. Truly. I mean, this is what Stimson is about. This is why I joined, because you come up with ideas, you do them, and you make it happen, and that's where we want to go with this. So anyway, let's thank our speakers, and now questions. Yeah, but I'm just excited. Okay. So we'll continue informally over cocktails, but I want to have some formal time now for questions from the audience. And please identify yourself and then ask the question. And there's a microphone coming. Thank you.
Laura Holgate, various affiliations. I want to add to this riff here, and maybe speaking beyond my authority as a member of the Fissile Material Working Group Steering Committee to... All right. Sarah, may I? All right. We've been looking for how to connect with NISGIS, so we're going to be in touch, and we want to continue the great work that had been done between the Fissile Material Working Group, I was obviously not part of it then, and the industry summit in the context, or the industry community in the context of the 2 summits in last April, and so we've been looking for the entry point, and if it's you, John, we'll take it.
Oh, excellent! Thank you. Whoa. Let's have other good questions like that. Over here.
Hey, Fernando Munoz. Do you think there's too much emphasis on the supply side and not enough on the demand side? And by that I mean, we have an amazing product. We're building 3rd-generation reactors that have passive cooling, so it's not possible for them to melt down. But in the last decade, worldwide, renewables have received approximately $100 billion worth of subsidies. If that were invested in nuclear power plants, we could have a lot more green energy, or the CO2 emissions would go down. Sure. But there's something fun and exciting about talking about wind and solar, and not about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, a lot of people immediately they freak out or they are nervous. Is there not enough emphasis on getting the public to accept nuclear, or getting the public to understand how nuclear actually functions? I'm sure everyone in this room understands more or less how it works, and they feel confident in the energy source because we understand how it works. But a lot of people a lot of the public doesn't understand. And so is there a possibility that maybe we're not putting enough emphasis on getting the public to understand the new technologies that we're trying to implement?
Yeah, so I could say we can always do better there. She started us off this morning by reflecting on 3 Mile Island, and I would say my personal reflection as I look back on the industry as a whole after something like 3 Mile Island, I think it taught the industry to sort of stay off the radar screen. And so I would say we've done that extremely well. And so as a result of that, I think we're paying a bit of a price for that right now, in that rather than have that sort of strong, broad public outreach for the last 35 or 40 years, it's been, hey, let's learn how to really operate these things well. We share a lot of information in the nuclear industry. I think it's unique in that way, how much operational experience that we do share. We feel very connected, only strong as the weakest link. I think it has served the industry incredibly well, but it's been sort of industry to industry, if you will, and not so much, to your point, the public conversation. And so I think that would be a positive outcome of the stress that the industry is under right now, is in fact to sort of get that nuclear story out much broader. And let me be clear, we're not against renewables, we're not against solar and wind. To me, it's an embracing, a partnering, if you will, of renewables with nuclear at the end of the day that makes the clean energy platform, if you will, that we all need and quite frankly we want for our children, to play out. And so it's not only describing the advanced nuclear and what it is about and whatnot. I think that also reflects on the nuclear that we have today. And sort of better explaining the role that it plays. And wind and solar, no matter sort of where it is that you place it, at the end of the day, they're an intermittent source. And so partnering it with a 7 days a week, 24 hours a day source, again, gives you, I think, the strongest clean energy platform.
Let's just take a couple of questions together, and then we'll answer them together.
Hi, good evening. My name is Erin Dumbacher from the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Thank you so much for your discussions today. Could you talk to us a little bit about if you were to suggest to regulators, perhaps, where you think they need to be looking when it comes to emerging technologies and specifically cybersecurity? So what is the next step beyond what you're currently doing now that you think you should be doing in the future?
Thank you. I saw another question over here. No.
Okay, my name is Hannah, and I am from George Washington University, and I have a question for Mr. Frank Saunders about the Bruce powers. Earlier it was mentioned that China and Russia is, a lot of power plants use the construction design. So which construction design was used for the Bruce power? If you don't mind to answer that.
Okay, well, those are very direct questions, so why don't we go ahead?
Yeah, well, two questions there that I think are kind of relevant. The design in Canada is CANDU reactors, so they're a natural uranium reactor. So all our reactors up there are CANDUs at the moment, except for the research reactors. And on the question about what do we do, the smaller reactors, it's really all about looking at it from a regulatory point of view and understanding the actual risk that's posed. It's my view that we've kind of got into this place in nuclear where everybody assumes they know what the risk is and what the danger is. In reality, they've never really stopped to look at what it is. And if you stop to think about it, you would realize there are a lot of things in the world that are a heck of a lot more dangerous than nuclear power. And yet we live with them every day, we don't even think about it. So how did we get so far down this road? We've been doing a lot of work in Ontario and in Canada in general to be open about nuclear, putting everything on the website. There's no more hiding behind this stuff. It's all out there. Everybody can see it. Our ratings these days are in the mid-80s, public support ratings, so low to mid-80s, have been for a few years now. So I think that pays off. Still lots of arguments with the NGOs at hearings and stuff, but that's not going to change. That's the way it is for everything. But I think when it comes to the smaller reactors and the like, the real understanding is what is the risk, what kind of security you need to offset it. So you start from the threat risk assessment, understand what the real risk is, and based on that you take the appropriate measures. And they don't all have to be large forces of security guards. The physical designs of the reactors will go a long way towards providing you that security. And it's a little bit about, as we said, you got to think on the front end. And one thing about this generation of reactors, we think all kinds of nice things now that we wish we had done in the current set of reactors. In refurbishing the Bruce units, we thought about, well, we could just take the whole reactor out and put a new one in, except we made the hole at the top of the reactor a few feet too small. Right? We could have made it a little bigger. We just didn't think of it that way. Would have been a lot easier way to do refurbishment, but there you go. Next time around, we'll get that right. So when we talk as an industry with the designers on these new reactors, we say to them things like that. Hey, they got to be portable. We got to get them in there. Hey, we don't want them around after we shut them down. So 4 years, 5 years, out of there, store it away somewhere, right? You got to be able to take the car out. You got to be able to do all these things, which they can build in now to a design. And if you do it right on security, you can do the same thing. And part of the reason we're into the analytics and looking at the threat risk from an analytical point of view, it's the way we do everything in nuclear, is it gives us a base other than your own personal opinion about how the risk can be perceived. I believe that will actually shape out and take care of itself as we move down the road. There is a kind of underlying fear about nuclear that we just have to talk more about it to get people on the same page and educate them as to what the fear really is.
Why don't we take one last question and see if we have any final remarks from the panel before we adjourn?
Stephanie Cook, Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. I have a question for you, Mr. Saunders. I was very interested in what you said about the ORIX or the OPEX. I'm not terribly familiar with how that works or who is a member of it. But I was just remembering back to Chernobyl and how long it took for us to understand what was happening. And I wonder, has that system corrected that problem, like that wouldn't happen again in any country with nuclear power, that if they had a bad accident, we would know about it as quickly as you described?
Well, the capability is there to provide the information as quickly. However, no system can get around the governments that operate it. So if there's a reason, then you wouldn't necessarily. But I think actually, I would say that most governments these days, given that you can't really hide these things anyway, have changed their approach on that. And I don't think you would ever see a repeat of Chernobyl like you did. And there were some issues in Fukushima as well, although for different reasons, right? I think we've all learned a lot and understand that information is actually really important. And generally, the lack of information causes people to think the worst. So hiding it does you no good. You need to tell people. And I think it's got a lot better. We certainly have the mechanisms. We can transfer the data. That's not a problem.
I certainly learned a lot from this. Maria, I appreciated your discussing the need for a broader conversation. Frank, your discussion of the need for international information sharing for security, I mean, that is so right on. And John, engagement with the contact group as a way to get through the bureaucracies to the international organizations is certainly, we'll try to help you on that one. Is there any final comments from any of you? Okay. Well, thank you, and let's adjourn.